Good morning. My name is David from 52 Churches in 52 Weeks. This past summer, our journey led us to an exceptionally unique church visit. At a nun convent in Gower, Missouri, we encountered the perplexing incorruptibility of a deceased Sister Wilhelmina. When her body was being exhumed from her grave, to everyone's surprise, her body was found to still be intact with very little decay. When news of this spread, thousands of Catholics had to see this for themselves because many were thinking it was a modern-day miracle, and Sister Wilhelmina, well, this has to be a sign that she was a saint. I'll leave a link to the YouTube video in the links below. But much to my surprise was the response that I got from our Catholic audience. I had so many requests to do another traditional Latin Mass type of service because one thing that Sister Wilhelmina advocated for was the traditional Catholic ways, especially when it came to holding traditional Latin Mass. Inside the Catholic faith, there is this sense of discontent permeating because of Pope Francis in July of 2021. So as a Protestant, I was like, what is going on? So what I understand is Pope Francis 2 years ago, he issued this sweeping regulation on traditional Latin Mass. So essentially, if a priest wants to celebrate it, he needs to get permission from his local bishops, who then have to get permission from the Vatican. So right now, it's an interpretation that Pope Francis is trying to get away from the traditions, get away from the regressive Roman Catholic ways, and trying to usher in this more modern-day, progressive, forward-thinking liturgy. So this past Sunday, I drove out to downtown Chicago to attend St. John Cantius Church. This is a historic Polish church who has several masses every day, and I understand they hold 5 masses each Sunday. So they still practice Latin Mass, and I got to attend 3 of the 5 for this Sunday. One was a low Mass in Latin, a sung Mass in English, and then a sung Mass in Latin. And coming from a lifetime Protestant, to my surprise, I prefer Latin Mass over the modern liturgy that they do with the English Mass. And I'm going to try and do my best to explain why. But one of the strangest things from this visit wasn't necessarily the liturgy, but it was the introduction of a relic that was on display from Rome. And as a Protestant, I don't know anything about relics until this past Sunday. And this thing has a remarkable story in itself, and I have so many questions about it. So I made the visit this past Sunday. I'm going to show you a few sights and sounds. I'll be back in a moment with some thoughts.
Qui pro nobis et totus, motis secundetur, et remissione peccatorum, ut facite in mea conversazione.
In the past, I used to be very judgmental. I would take out my Bible like a sword and pretty much slice and dice any other type of belief sets that didn't align with my own. But after doing 52 churches in 52 weeks for 2 different times now, I've learned to take a much more humble approach because it facilitates so much healthier dialogue. The approach that I take nowadays is to have genuine curiosity, have respectful observance, and overall find appreciation in different type of commonalities that you can find. Am I going to agree with everything? No, of course not. But I think one of the biggest things that you find in Scripture, and we do this all the time, because when we are in our own different church, in our own different backgrounds, of course we think that our religious beliefs are the greatest. And like even in the Bible with the disciples, they're bickering among each other about who is the greatest. And it's an interesting question because how do you even gauge that? What's the barometer? Was it who healed the most? Was it who prayed the most? Was it who converted the most? Whoever wrote the most? Like Jesus himself had to come into that argument, put a child in front of him, and basically say, like this child, you have to be the least to be the greatest. And as I have dived into the Catholic faith, because in the past I used to have so many biases and misconceptions, I've had to learn to be lesser. And as a result, I have been lessened from some great Catholic members of my audience with this channel. And it's helped me to fine-tune how to understand the Catholic faith. Now that said, especially after this particular visit, I had so many new questions popping up in my head as I was seeing everything around this particular church. Like, for instance, the biggest question I had was for the third Mass, I sat down in a pew near the front. So to my right was this display, and on the bottom was this Snow White looking mannequin. And like I had seen Sister Wilhelmina, learned all about some of the incorruptibility among many Catholic saints. So several questions popped up when I was seeing this, because what is the story here? Is this someone who also had an incorrupt body? What's the story here? And then also, as I would observe the different masses that I attended for this, more questions popped up, as in, like, why is this spiraling pulpit so giant? Why all the gold? Why is this scale so big? Why the incense? Why the movements? What's this big deal with the relic? So I'm trying to navigate all of these questions, but also finding appreciation, because as a result of me learning more about the Catholic faith, I have found a lot of striking beauty in it. So like I'm navigating this weird type of thing right now where I appreciate the beauty, but there are so many questions that my Protestant brain is not understanding. So in this section of the video, I'm going to try to do my best to explain what was circulating in my head as I was observing this Latin Mass. To recap this visit, I arrived at the church at about 7:30 in the morning. I was hoping to do 4 of the 5 Masses, so I had planned to be there for about 5 hours. And when I first got there, I was shocked at just how packed this was, even so early in the morning. I thought I was going to get there, it was going to be pretty quiet. It was a low Mass, so it was just Latin Mass without any music used. But I walked in, and the first word that came to mind was intimidating. Like, I've been to several different Catholic churches, several different Catholic basilicas, but for this, I just felt so intimidated. It was just so gigantic, and I think it was just the gold all over the place. To me, it felt like, this is going to sound ridiculous. I felt like I was in the movie Aladdin, when Aladdin first goes into this cave of wonders and he sees all these riches around him, all these coins. And obviously the real treasure is the genie lamp. But to me, like, I'm looking around and I'm just like, this is huge in scale. And the thing on top of that was, I was shocked at just how many people were here this early in the morning. I had to take a look. The pews were split up into 4 sections, and each row had at least 30 pews from my count. So there's 120 pews, and almost every single one was filled with people. So I got there a little bit late, just due to trying to find a parking spot. I sat in the very back, but to my side on the left, there were several people just standing up in a line on a wall. At first I thought it was just like standing room only, and maybe I should give up my pew, but then I understood, oh, they're in line for confession. So it was very strange to walk in and just have about a dozen people just staring at you in this line. So the first Mass, I didn't really take a whole lot from it. The second Mass was in English and it was sung. Nothing different to write home about for that standpoint. But the third one was then sung Mass in Latin. And this was very unique to me to see this for a second time. So I got to the very front to observe this. And I think one thing that really spoke to me was engaging all the senses. What do I mean by that? So at some point during the Latin Mass, I had so many questions popping up in my head during all of this, but finally there was a part where I just kind of snuffed all that out. And especially with the Latin language, I don't understand anything that's being said really. There was this beauty in the language though, where it was like a mystery to me. It was almost akin to the mysteries of God in the spiritual realm. And the more that I thought about that, the more I felt engaged through my senses. You know, the 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. Not being able to understand the language, everything that I'm hearing with my ears, I just removed any type of understanding of that and just appreciated the beauty of the language. Then I started to appreciate what was all around me with this magnificent church, with all the gold, with all the sights of it all. So you see the beauty of the architecture. And then on top of that, then you get the incense, the smell. There's a beauty to that as well. So I've heard of dopamine hits. I'm having this grand scale in sight, this grand scale in smell, this grand scale in what I'm hearing. And then on top of that, then you go on the kneelers. So you get your sense of touch. And after so long, I'm a Protestant, I don't do kneelers very often. So even that is humbling, because it's my knees start to hurt after so long. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I'm just not used to it. So the only sensation, the only sense I have left is taste. And at the conclusion, the focal point of these masses is for the body and blood of Jesus Christ. So everyone goes up there. And before, I never used to go up for this. There was one video that I talked about at a monk church where I went up there, I got the Eucharist, and I took a very arrogant approach. Here, after reading so many comments, I did go up and I gave the X to be blessed. And it was very strange because I'm looking for that final sensation of taste. Get the body and blood, and I can't get it. And it's like I'm missing this last component for this church experience, for what I feel like I need as a Christian. But I tell you, one of the most beautiful things I ever realized was during this particular Mass. And they had all the movements is still a curiosity to me. But there was a part where all these acolytes come out and they have these gigantic candles, just gigantic. And they hold these up. And one of the deacons, subdeacons, I'm not really quite sure yet how that works, they have the word and they raise the word above their head. And there was a part of me where I saw all this, and it was a huge reminder to me that you see all these riches, you see all this beauty, you see all the architecture. There's so much to see, yet it doesn't hold a candle. It doesn't hold a light to what we're all here with the Word of God. And that's something that I never would have understood about the Catholic faith if it wasn't for this example that I saw. I never would have gotten that from a Bible class. I never would have got that from a theology class. That really puts some things into perspective that as a Protestant, I may have judged in the past the Catholic faith for. Here, it's like I see so much beauty, but again, it's nothing compared to the Word that they are putting the sole focus on at that particular time in the Mass. At the conclusion of each Mass, a giant line would form around the church to observe and see the veneration of a relic. Now, as a Protestant, I had never even heard of the term veneration, and when it comes to relics, I just always associated that with archaeology. So, like, I heard someone mention about getting in line. I had no idea what I was getting in line for, but I figured, well, I'll join this line and see where it goes. And along the way, there was a sign, a banner up that talked about what relics are. So what I took away from that is it mentions that a relic is broken up into three classes. The first class is a relic it can be the bones or fragments of a saint. Second, it could be an item that was owned by a saint. Or third, it can be an item that was touched by a saint. So they had another section that also talked about what relics had done in the Bible. So the one that they used was the prophet Elisha, because a man's corpse touched the bones of Elisha's, and that man was able to rise from the dead. It also mentions how Jesus' cloak touched a woman and it cured her hemorrhage. And then it also talks about Paul and some handkerchiefs having some healing ability. So as a Protestant, I was extremely confused about all of this and just want to understand and learn more. So again, this is where I need to be careful with my own biases because I don't understand this. For this particular weekend, on display they had the arm of St. Jude the Apostle, kind of doing this with a glass case for this relic. So Jude, he is the half-brother of Jesus. He also was the disciple who wrote the epistle of Jude. So during each Mass, they had a priest or deacon, I'm not entirely sure. He would go up this spirally pulpit and he would give this story, this 10-minute homily. He would hit 10-minute mark every single time for all three that I heard. And he talked about this story of a woman who had been basically home-stricken for 20 years with a disease. But when I don't know if she touched it or what, or if she just prayed to Jude, but at one point she was healed. So he talked about how Jude, his original name was Judas. So in the Catholic faith, people would not pray to Jude because they thought that maybe the prayers would be going to Judas Iscariot. So at one point, though, just a few hundred years ago, the priest is describing how people start to pray to Jude, the apostle of the impossible, because all of a sudden they start to see more prayers answered when they would pray through Jude. So Jude would have, the way that they called him the apostle of the impossible was because of his epistle talking about perseverance and getting through impossible times. So as a Protestant, I was extremely confused by all this. I'd never heard of relics. This was all new to me. And I want to be, and again, this is where I need to navigate to be respectful in my trying to remove previous biases and try to understand this. So if you are a Catholic in my audience, I'd love to hear more. Feel free to leave comments about how this works, because like I'm looking at the FAQs that they gave for this, you know, with Elisha's bones being touched or Jesus's cloak. And in the third Mass, at the conclusion, there was a man that came up who was completely blind. And it's like, it makes me wonder, what was the story with this gentleman? Because like he had to be helped by ushers. And I think he wanted to touch it, but I don't understand the significance of relics based off the other Bible story about the healing of the royal officer's son. Because the royal officer comes to Jesus, he says his son needs healing, and Jesus is able to pretty much snap a finger, and the son is healed a city away. So for this particular gentleman, I found just huge amounts of faith for this man to make it out to this church, to be a part of this relic. So I don't quite understand, like, can this man set up an appointment? Does he need to touch it? Or is it something where he just needs to be in the presence of the relic? To me, it's all about faith, but I'm having trouble trying to understand why a relic is used in one example, but then you have that healing of the royal officer's son. So if you have an answer for that to help understand, I'd love to hear that. We are going to wrap it up on that. Hope you enjoyed this visit to St. John Cantius Church in downtown Chicago. We'll have some future videos coming up, so make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date for future videos. But until next time, hope you have a good one.